right, so good evening, everybody. The content of this presentation is proprietary and confidential information of the Florida Firefighters Safety and Health Collaborative. It is not intended to be distributed by any party without written consent of the Florida Firefighters Safety and Health Collaborative. Attendees should note that the educational component of the session is being recorded and will be published on our collaborative website and YouTube page. To maintain complete confidentiality, an announcement will be made before the recording begins, and only presenter will be identified during the recording. Therefore, to ensure your privacy, all attendees are asked to mute their microphones at this time until an announcement is made that the recording is complete. Presentations are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace independent professional judgment. The ideas expressed in this presentation are the professional opinion of the presenter and do not necessarily represent those of the Florida Firefighters Safety and Health Collaborative or its constituents. Before acting on any of the information presented, attendees should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to their individual situation and seek independent professional advice should any concerns arise. If you or anyone you know are in what is believed or perceived to be a situation that is or may become harmful, please reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline via phone at 1-800-273-8255 or through their website, suicideprevention.org, or as always, dial 911 in the event of emergency. That said, we're super grateful to welcome our November resident to the Florida Firefighter and Safety Health Collaborative Family and Caregiver section, Kellie O'Dare from the Second Alarm Project. We are enthralled to have our sisters in this, fight for wellness for firefighters here. I'm going to hand it over to you. And we're excited to have you back here, Kellie.
Thank you, Michelle. I am very excited to be here tonight. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again to the collaborative for having me this evening and for all of the incredible work that you all do on behalf of our first responder community. I've said it before, but I truly feel like we are standing on the shoulders of giants in the work that we're doing here in the Panhandle with Second Alarm Project, because we have the path that you all have made for us. And so I just am eternally grateful and proud to be able to say that I link arms with your organization and with each of you personally as well on this call. And we had a very successful CAP program last week with the Safety and Health Collaborative. And whenever we do these things, I'm always really sad when it's over because I immediately miss you all and the work that we're doing. So I'm excited to be here tonight. And thank you to each of you who are on this call for taking time out of your busy lives, your busy schedules. It's probably family time. You may be logging in from work. So that's a gift. Sharing your time with us to hear this message tonight is a gift. As Michelle mentioned, I'm Kellie O'Dare, and my day job, as I like to call it, is I'm a faculty member with Florida A&M University in the public health program here in Tallahassee. But my life's work and my passion and the reason that I'm here this evening is because of each one of you. So I'm the founder and the director of the Second Alarm Project, which is a grant-funded not-for-profit mental wellness program for first responders and their families, primarily in the Florida Panhandle. I have a Master of Social Work degree, and while I'm a trained clinician, I do not maintain licensure, and I'm not currently practicing, although I do quite a bit of work and crisis intervention, but it's very much within my scope of practice. But I certainly don't do counseling or therapy, but fortunately we have people on our team that do that. So I serve in more of a behavioral health navigator role in the capacity of our work that we do here in the Panhandle. I also have a master's degree in public administration, and my PhD is in social work from Florida State University. Go Noles. I'm a homegrown student here in Tallahassee, so I'm proud of that. those are the credentials that give me the book cred to do this work, but that's not, again, that's not my why, and that's not really what gives me a little bit of street cred to get my foot in the door to do this work. I grew up in a fire service family, and I'm married to a professional firefighter. The photo on the bottom right of the screen is my uncle, Sean O'Dare, who was a Miami-Dade fire rescue paramedic who gave his life in the line of duty back in 1985. And that photo in the middle there is my husband and our hard to wrangle most days teenage 15-year-old son. So that's really kind of my family of origin why that I do this work. But the photo on the top left is just a small snapshot because I couldn't possibly capture in one photo the number of first responders and everyone that I've been so incredibly fortunate to work with over the past few years. But my family of whys is continually growing every time I do any of this work. And so I consider each one of you here tonight, if I hadn't met you previously, as part of my why. On tonight's agenda is the topic of resiliency. I'm a bit of a word nerd, and I find word etymology, yes, that's really a thing, absolutely fascinating. I think you can learn a lot from a word when you don't even know its definition just by looking at the root of the words. So take resiliency, for example. The root of the word resiliency are back and salient. And the formal definition is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape or elasticity. So that's the formal definition of resiliency. In my life, I wear these two hats, or I kind of operate in two roles that are relevant to our discussion tonight on family resiliency. The first on the right being a fire wife and a family member of a first responder with a first responder family. The second on the left being a researcher, a student, a practitioner of, and I'd like to think myself an emerging subject matter expert on first responder mental wellness and resiliency. I teach this stuff, so theoretically I should be fairly knowledgeable about it, at least I would hope, right? And then just like all of us, there are a lot of roles that I balance in between the fire wife side and the Dr. O'Dare side. I'm a cousin, I'm an aunt, I'm a friend, I'm a gardener, at least I try. Not a very good one, but I put in the effort, A for effort, water sports lover, etc. So I'd like to think that I nimbly navigate and balance between those roles, but our topic tonight that we're here to talk about is a real talk about resiliency. So most days, this is more of what I look like. Don't be alarmed. I'm okay in this picture, and I actually did this to myself purposefully. And I was actually glad when I learned somebody had taken a photo of it, and I shared it all over Facebook, social media. This is my compulsive exercising that I do, but that's a topic for a whole nother webinar, so we won't spend much time working on that. But this is really what it looks like. It's real. It's not perfect. It's not pretty. It's not wrapped up in a bow. And most days I feel like, I've fallen flat on my face. So I want to share the text conversation that Michelle and I had when she asked, she's probably going to kill me, when she asked if I would be willing to do a webinar on family resiliency. She said, "How about family resiliency?" And I said, "Most days this household is a yikes show. So I don't know that I'm your expert on that topic." And she said, "I trust you." Mistake number one, right? that one there. I said, "Okay, just like everything else in life, it's imperfect and messy, and the beauty is in the chaos." And she said, "Life is a beautiful mix of chaos. Why not talk about the truth?" And I replied, "Yep, I think it helps to hear that even those of us who study and teach this stuff struggle. Vulnerability at its finest. Real talk on resiliency, LOL." That's it. That's the title. And so that's how the idea for this evening was born. Point being, if we're going to talk about resiliency in families, we're doing a huge disservice if we don't say right off the get-go that it's messy, it's chaotic, it's hard. Sometimes it It straight up, it sucks. It's not neat. It's not sterile or perfect. And, I don't know that we would want it to be, because there is beauty in the chaos. There is real in the chaos. So tonight we're going to talk about real resiliency. Yes, that's a word I just made up. It's okay. I'm a college professor. We do it all the time. We get a pass. Real resiliency doesn't come in a prepackaged, neat training program with a bow, especially for first responder families. There isn't a checklist or a map that you can use to get from point A to point B and say, hey, I'm resilient now. Like most things worthwhile in this life, it takes practice, hard work. You're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, and you're going to need support, and you're going to need a lot of grace. In fact, resilience isn't even an actual skill that can be taught. It's a construct, concept, or an end state that we're continually working towards developing for ourselves and our families. The concept of fitness is similar. There's ways you can improve your fitness through things like nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, etc. But you teach a set of behaviors that help people develop skills and habits to become more fit. It's similar for resiliency. You teach behaviors and tools and techniques that help us overcome adversity. And these things need to be integrated and practiced and become habits. And just like getting fitter, sometimes becoming more resilient ain't pretty or fun. It's a lot of hard work we have to put in. And also similar to fitness, what works well may look a little different for each of us. Some people might like spin class, some people might like weightlifting, some people might like yoga, etc. Resiliency is similar in that there's many techniques that can get us to that end state, and what we need to do is have a framework to work within to kind of get us to where we need to go. If you Google the term resiliency training, it's very easy to get overwhelmed at the abundance of resources and information that's out there. So tonight, in keeping with this new concept of real resiliency, we are going to focus on one book that I find to be very good. It's evidence-based. Most of the material in it is evidence-based, which is, if you know me, you know that that's very important to me. The book is Resilience: The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges by authors Southwick and Charney. And they present these 10 principles to learn and practice in yourself or in your families to develop resiliency. So again, this is kind of the framework. The first one: confronting fears, maintaining an optimistic outlook, seek and accept social support, imitate sturdy role models, rely on inner moral compass, embrace spiritual or religious practice, practice cognitive flexibility, attend to health and well-being, create meaning and opportunity from adversity, and accept what cannot be changed / accept personal responsibility for emotional well-being. So confront fears. Oh snap, right off the bat, we just got uncomfortable and messy, right? Wait, I just thought we were going to talk about some tactical breathing, maybe some yoga, eating right. Yes, all those things are important and they're going to help us be more resilient. And absolutely, we should be doing those things. But for the vast majority of us, especially our first responders and our first responder family members, we need some deeper work. When we avoid scary things, we become more scared. When you face your fears, they lose power, they become less frightening. So the picture I chose here was for those of us who are parents, or maybe those of us who had parents who used this trick. When your kid's scared of something under the bed, what do? You have them lift up the bed sheet and look under the bed, and you show them there's nothing under there. They have to face that fear. And usually it's not just one time that you have to show them there's not a monster under the bed. You have to go back multiple times and show them that there's no monster under the bed for them to assuage that fear. So we see this a lot with PTSD and anxiety, and a technique called exposure, when done well, is highly effective in managing and treating PTSD and anxiety related issues. So we need to be exposed to that fear-inducing stimulus in a safe environment. That's a huge caveat. I'm not saying, if you're dealing with PTSD or anxiety to, go out and recreate the scenario or the situation that might be your reference trauma or your trigger trauma. So that's my disclaimer and my warning about that. But I love this quote: "I'm scared, but I can learn from this. This is a test that's going to make me stronger." And that's not easy to do. It's hard work. The next one is now my screen's covered again. Maintaining an optimistic outlook. So this isn't just being a positive person. One of the terms that I love that I use all the time is something called toxic positivity. And that's when somebody just is unable or refuses to see that sometimes there are bad situations and acknowledging that. It's more of a realistic optimism, which is balancing a positive outlook with a realistic view of the world. So those of us who try to be realistic optimists, we pay close attention to the negative information that is relevant to the problems that we face, but we don't remain focused on the negative. So it's acknowledging it and dealing with it. And one thing that highly resilient people do is they're able to easily disengage from problems that appear to be unsolvable. So they know when to cut their losses and move on, and they know when to engage and stay engaged with the problem that they feel like they can't solve. So realistic optimists are realistic about the world, but they are also confident about their abilities. They see the world accurately, but they believe that they are a rock star. And I love that one. Seek and accept social support. Friends and loved ones are key when life gets hard. Our brains are hardwired to have social support to function optimally. This is in the anatomy of our brain. It's in the physiology of our brain. If you look at the different types of brain chemicals that are elicited when we feel good, those are important. Connections with others releases some of those chemicals. It calms our mind. It reduces stress. And the solution isn't just receiving help or social support. It's also giving that help, helps elicit those chemicals in the brain. Imitating sturdy role models. When researchers go out and study kids who grow up in very impoverished circumstances, very, very difficult childhoods, and they go on to live productive, healthy lives, what do we find? Well, generally across the board, they had great role models who, even in the midst of very difficult family circumstances, were able to provide them positive and supportive environments. And this holds true even with children who were raised in homes with substance use, abuse, parents with serious and persistent mental health concerns. The researchers observed that the resilient children are the resilient kids, the ones who grew up to be productive and emotionally healthy, they had at least one person in their lives who truly supported them and served as a role model. Resilient people rely on an inner moral compass. Many resilient people possess a very strong sense of right and wrong, which can strengthen them during periods of extreme stress and afterwards when they're adjusting after the trauma. Resilient individuals also demonstrate high levels of altruism or selflessness, which is concern for the welfare of others and giving to others without the expectation for anything in return. A moral compass can be defined as a strong feeling of right and wrong, and it tells us when we must act or when we must do something, even when we feel like we can't. Resilient people tend to embrace spiritual or religious practice. And in fact, religious belief among tragedy survivors has been found across multiple different, very well done studies to be the single most powerful force in explaining the tragedy and explaining post-traumatic growth afterwards. So you might be thinking, but what if I'm not religious? Well, not a problem. Another word nerd moment. The word religion actually comes from the Latin word meaning to bind. So the relationship between resilience and religion looks like it's partially explained by the social quality of religious attendance. Being a member of a congregation has tremendous protective factors. And what the researchers find is that much of the strength of religious activity comes from being a part of that community. Resilient individuals practice something called cognitive flexibility. People are People who are resilient tend to be very flexible in the way that they think about challenges and the way that they react emotionally to stress. So they're not wedded to one style of coping. They're able to adapt and to learn. Instead of being wedded to one method to solve a problem, they shift in between coping strategies from one to another, depending on what the circumstances call for. People who are resilient attend to their health and well being. Most resilient people have good exercise habits that keep their bodies and their minds strong. The stress of exercise on our bodies actually helps us adapt to stress when we feel like life is being challenging for us. And resilient people are often those folks who are lifelong learners. They keep growing and exercising their mind in addition to their bodies. And so when I was choosing a photo for this slide, I thought to myself, wow, when I exercise, it never looks like that. Like this is the, this not like I wish it looked like this when I exercise, but it just never does. Like Lindsay was saying, she didn't want to turn on her camera because when I exercise, I'm like a sweaty hot mess. It's not a beautiful day, and people are looking good and feeling fit. The point being, again, this stuff doesn't have to look perfect. You don't have to have a fancy gym membership. You don't have to have a personal trainer. Just get out and go for a walk, a simple walk. There's programs out there where you can do exercises in your living room. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be something that you're able to do, and that's going to work for you. Another example of this I have was when I was deployed down in Surfside. There was a team from IAFF down there, and a lot of the peers were from FDNY. So that was a pretty amazing experience to meet those guys and learn from them. But there was one, his name was Angelo, and every morning we were all staying in the same hotel. I would go downstairs, bleary eyed and not functioning at all, to walk across the street to go to the Starbucks, because there was a Starbucks across the street and it opened early, thankfully. And I'd walk out of the hotel and I'd see Angelo out there jogging. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to ask him what he's doing. I'm like, wow, you're awesome. You're in the middle of this literal disaster zone and you're still paying attention to your self-care and your best practice habits and your resiliency. And here I am feeling real bad at that point, because like I just need to get an ounce of coffee into my system to feel human. And he's already, run however many miles that day. And he said, well, yeah, if I'm teaching it, I got to do it, right? I gotta practice what I preach. I thought, well, crap, I guess I better go get my jog in. So again, it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be real. People who demonstrate high levels of resiliency are able to create meaning and opportunity from adversity. Many of you know we've had a couple of very difficult situations here in the Leon County area and surrounding counties over the past 6 months, year, couple years. And recently we had a group of IAFF peers come into our organization and help us do some peer support with our entire membership, which was an amazing opportunity to make some good out of a tragedy, a very tragic death of a member, unexpected death of a member. So I'm a huge fan of this Viktor Frankl quote. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And so we talk a lot about post-traumatic growth, which is a positive psychological change that we hope to experience as the result of a highly challenging life event. And of course, we would hope that that didn't happen, even if we better ourselves because of it. Most certainly everybody who's experienced one of these events would gladly go back to the way they were prior to the event. But it forces us to kind of take another look at our world. And post-traumatic growth does happen naturally over time without any type of formal intervention. But we do know that it can be facilitated in several ways, the most powerful of those being connection to other human beings, service to other human beings. So it's the power of that human connection. And then the last one is accepting what cannot be changed and taking personal responsibility. Another Viktor Frankl quote here. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And this also reminds me of another area of research that I'm very interested in, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as you may have heard. And interestingly enough, anecdotally, what we're finding is that many first responders come into the profession with a higher number of ACEs than other professions. Perhaps they've been through a lot in their life, and this is a path that they see that they can help others and serve their community and perhaps protect people from going through what they've been through themselves. So, regardless of our past, regardless of our childhood, regardless of our ACEs, at some point we have to be able to accept that personal responsibility and make changes and kind of break the cycle, or break the chain, if you will, of some of these intergenerational things that happen within families. And so that is the 10 protective factors that's discussed in that book. And it's an easy read. It's a good book. It's available on audiobook too, if you like to listen to podcasts. But I wouldn't be doing my job as a college professor if I didn't give you some homework. So this is your homework. I want everybody on this call to choose one of these areas. And I really encourage you to focus on the one that is the most uncomfortable for you when you're looking through it, when you're reading through it. And work on that for 30 days. Read the book, Google it, learn as much as you can, seek out some resources. Practice that for 30 days and see where you are. Because I think that taking this all in, this is a lot. You're like, wow, I got to do all this to be more resilient. No, let's just start with one. We're going to start with one thing. We're going to practice it. We're going to focus on it for 30 days. And then you're going to report back. And I'll put my email in the chat because I really want to hear from you how this is going. And so I have one more I'm adding in here, number 11, Dr. O'Dare's Resiliency wild card, and that's empathy. It's not in the book, but I know that the flyer for tonight's workshop said we were going to talk about the things that every first responder family should be doing in their households for better resiliency. So here it is. So you're going to practice your one thing, and then you got to do this as well. You got to learn and practice empathy. And I wish every human, not just first responder families, would learn and practice empathy. Empathy is the capacity to learn and understand what another person is experiencing from their own frame of reference. It's about shared feelings and not shared experiences. So somebody might be talking to you about what's going on in their home or in their family or at work, and you might not be able to connect with that experience because you haven't lived that and you haven't walked that walk. But what I encourage you to do, and again, it takes practice, listen for the feelings that are underlying that story. Is it sadness? Is it frustration? Is it happiness? Is it joy? And the way to be empathetic is to think about a time in your life where you've experienced joy, where you've experienced frustration. That's how you make an empathetic connection. It really doesn't have anything to do with the situation being discussed. It has to do with connecting that feeling underlying the situation. And so that can be a really vulnerable place to be, because at some level you have to connect with a feeling inside of yourself where you've been there before. And perhaps you're not in a place where you can do that, and that's okay. One of the sayings that is used in the collaborative in the CAP is help from your scars and not from your wounds. We can't really help from our wounds, but we can help from our scars. So practicing empathy takes a lot of introflexion and reflection in ourselves to make sure that we're at a place where we can actually truly be empathetic. And empathy is really about not about the response that you give to somebody when they're telling their story, because rarely can a response make something better. Sometimes when people tell you some of this really hard stuff that they're going through, there's nothing you can say or do that will make it better. What does make it better, what does help them in that moment, is that connection that they have with you. So when your first responder comes home and they're exhausted, and they've run, 19 calls in 24 hours or worse, um, regardless of how many honey-do list items are waiting, connect with the feeling that they're having. When was the last time you felt that exhausted? Heck, it might have been that day because your significant other has been gone for 24 or 48 hours, and you're exhausted because you've been running the household and the kids and your own work life and everything else that we all have going on from day to day. So try to connect with that feeling. And it's hard to do sometimes, especially when you're in your own feelings and you're frustrated because there's things you want done. And first responder, next time you come home and your spouse has been managing the household for 24 or 48 hours or however long, along with the kids and their own work and their own extracurricular activities, try to connect with your spouse or your significant other about what it feels like to be that overwhelmed, and just take some time to take a step back and connect with the feelings that each other is having, and not necessarily the details of the story and the situation. So I have one more slide in my formal presentation, and you might have caught that in one of the slides early on in the presentation, I used an image of the Velveteen Rabbit. I read a whole lot as a kid, and the Velveteen Rabbit book was always, always one of my favorites, even into adulthood. I just always loved this book. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for me when I started doing this work, when I reread this passage and it all kind of made sense. So, in closing, I would like to read an excerpt from that book to you. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came in to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside and a stick out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." And with that, I would love to answer questions, comments, concerns, and thank you all very much.
Kelly, thank you so much for that. I'm such a crier, and that was a perfect excerpt of that. I'll open the floor to questions. We are still recording, so if anyone's willing to ask on the recording, great. If not, we can stop the recording and we can have that confidential peer support time.
Kelly, it's Chris. Just wanted to say thank you for sharing that. It was really, really good. One of the things that we've said in the fire service over the last few years, there really wasn't enough awareness about mental health, and we're starting to see that kind of a change. And over the last few years, we actually included that into minimum standards in the state of Florida to actually kind of move the needle a little bit. My question really is more about the resiliency thing. Now that we're kind of getting the fire service to be more aware that these issues are affecting us, do you feel like that's the next step for where we need to go? Is to push resiliency aspects of it early on, within, um, within even within minimum standards. Do we go start there? Is that where you think we need to kind of? Is that the next part or the next phase of where we're going in the fire service?
I think so. I think that it's definitely, especially for the departments that kind of have a a head start on some of these things. And I know they're in minimum standards, but oftentimes they don't get reinforced either through new hire orientation or, it doesn't, some of it gets lost. So I think we kind of need a good balance of both. I've seen a lot of benefits from doing the awareness classes with the entire membership of a department. But after you do that, you have to have somewhere else to go. And I think that this might be that next step is the resiliency piece. And what a huge advocate and proponent of peer support that I am. I think it's, it is the heart of any resilient responder organization, but at some point you can only have so many trained peers within an organization. So we're putting so much effort and emphasis into doing peer support, which I definitely don't think we should stop, but I think we need to add this resiliency layer on top of that in addition to the mental health awareness. So I think that that's a great suggestion, Chris.
I have
Hey,
a
Chris,
go
I
ahead.
got something on that resiliency thing I've been doing. I got kind of hooked up with Dean Ali and some stuff they're doing up in North Carolina, and they're doing a pilot program now with it's called the Resilient Mind Project, and they actually taught recruit classes, rookie classes in Asheville, and compared them to another agency. Taught them mindfulness and breathing practices and just like 1 hour a day type stuff. And they did a study, and COVID kind of got in the way, but they're in the process of starting that up. So they're going to do a train the trainer in December, and they've been doing kind of a an online portion of it right now. So there's definitely things happening on that side of things.
Yeah, and they're amazing. I mean, anything that comes out of there is usually fantastic, and they generally give it as open access. So it's certainly something that we can take and incorporate, I would think.
And they actually have academia involved, and they're doing all kinds of data and collection and that kind of stuff with that as well. So
I have a follow-up question to that. I know that a lot of fire departments are you said that you have a big interest in adolescent traumas. And so I know, and I've been asked this quite a bit and researched it, but I'm curious to see what you have to say. So a lot of fire departments are looking into um, psychological testing, right? To kind of weed out people who may be living with some sort of a traumatic experience from previous to their hiring. What are your thoughts on departments doing things like that and the ability of a person to be resilient despite traumatic experiences earlier in their life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know most of the departments that we work with use some type of psychological screener, and so I'm a huge advocate of if a department is using a psychological screener to make sure that it's evidence based and that it's current. And that the person doing the screenings is first responder proficient and is not really a generalist, but somebody who knows about ACEs, who knows about trauma, who knows about resiliency, and knows about first responders. So that's incredibly important. I would say that I am an advocate of psychological screening because I think there are certain perhaps severe and persistent mental health concerns or active substance use concerns that could be an impediment in somebody doing a first responder job and doing it well for the safety of themselves, the people they work with, and the citizens. Um, but I do not think it should be used to exclude people who have overcome some adverse childhood experiences and who have demonstrated resiliency and are able to do the job. So That's kind of a long answer way to answer the question, but there are some really good evidence-based screeners and assessments that when a knowledgeable, trained, qualified professional is utilizing them to do psychological screening, I think it can be helpful.
Thanks so much for that. Anybody else have questions for Kelly before we stop the recording?
Kelly, I just wanted to, one of the things you said during your presentation was that you're seeing more and more people are coming into the fire service with a lot of traumas, and I'm not sure. I've heard that multiple times. I'm not sure where the data comes from, but I have heard that. And even recently at one of our BHAP trainings, I had shared some of that information that and specifically about how we have employees that are coming into just into the workforce who have had trauma, and I use the word rape, um, and we have employees that have been raped before, and somebody just looked at me in such a way that why would I even say that word, although it's reality. I think that it was important to kind of share that information that people do come into your workforce that have had these traumas, and as you mentioned, maybe that's why they may have gone into public safety. It was something that happened to them. So I was curious about where you have that information and if you would be willing to share it.
Yes, so there's several anecdotal studies that are looking at that right now. The ones that I've seen, I wouldn't kind of hang my hat on and say they're scientific. They're not peer reviewed. It's mostly people just doing some surveys and asking some questions. But one source that I did hear this from that I would say is extremely credible was the medical director from the IAFF Center of Excellence, Dr. Abby Morris, did a workshop for us. And she was talking about the uh, patients or the clients that they see at the Center of Excellence. And in her opinion, in her experience, she's seen a lot of them coming in with a high number of ACEs, far more than in her other psychiatric practice of other professions. So it's definitely something that's on my short list of things I want to explore more is looking at the prevalence of ACEs among first responder populations. But I think you really hit the nail on the head because especially if you look at something like rape and sexual assaults and even child sexual abuse or childhood sexual trauma, the rates of that are incredibly high, and that's just what we know about and what's reported. There's statistics out there that look at like 2 out of every 3 women and 1 out of every 3 boys and men experience some kind of childhood sexual trauma or some type of sexual assault in their lifetime. So the rates of this stuff are just so high in the general population that I think your point is incredibly important that in order to destigmatize it, in order to link people into services, we have to be talking about it more. So thank you for doing that.
Can I say something here?
Sure, please.
First, Kelly, Dr. Dare, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very good. Um, I was glad, I just want to comment, I was glad that you had the slide, embrace spiritual religious practice in there. I've been an advocate of chaplaincy being a part of the entire spectrum when it comes down to mental health, because I believe there's a spiritual aspect in healing, um, whether, whatever the person may need, not to push religion on anyone, but chaplains to be involved in the first responder community that are trained, are trauma informed, or have some type of background in what firefighters, first responders go through. So I was just want to thank you for having that one slide in there. Although chaplains, as I said, not involved to push anyone into that area, but there to be there for the first responder, not just in the area when something happens, but to be there before, during, and after an event to help them be resilient all the way through. So thank you for the presentation tonight.
You're welcome, Milton, and thank you for that feedback. And I absolutely couldn't agree more. You know, the longer I do this work and respond to large scale incidents and smaller scale incidents in our community, the value of a well trained fire chaplain cannot be overstated. And it's that interfaith, interdisciplinary chaplaincy piece that I've found is incredibly important and valuable, at least in the situations that I've seen them do their work. So I'm incredibly thankful for that.
Thank you.
Dr. O'Dare, can we have Milton speak on how he's contributing to the resiliency in Pinellas County?
I would love to hear that. Thank you. Milton, would you like to speak on that?
Uh, yes, thank you, Lindsay, for bringing that up. About 3 years ago, I started a program here in Pinellas County to reach out to first responders, basically just by having a breakfast that would include retired active first responders, regardless as to what agency you work for, when or where, to come together for fellowship and sort of a informal peer support, if you will. I started it in one place, figured I would have one, um, breakfast every once in a while. But it has grown. The response have been tremendous among the first responders. We're approaching our 100th breakfast, and we have them now in 8 locations throughout Pinellas and Pasco County. And tomorrow we'll be having our first one in the state of North Carolina. We have 2 locations in North Carolina, and probably we'll be starting a third in January. And we have several places here in the Tampa Bay area that we'll be expanding to. I say that because um, we're not expanding or going places because we just want to. We go in there upon requests, and so that to me shows that it's helping when we sit there and we don't navigate any conversation, but the conversations come forth. Where you hear someone say that I've never ran a call that bothered me, but before the end of the breakfast, they're talking about a call that they ran 20 years ago. At each breakfast gathering, there are 1 or 2 chaplains, and we have resource materials on what we call a resource table geared directly toward the first responder, whether it be law enforcement, firefighter, or EMS. So we have materials there for them to obtain. It's been received very well and steady growing. So thank you, Lindsay. But it's called the organization called First Responders Matter, nonprofit in Florida.
Well, I can vouch for that guy, Brandon Wilson. If y'all bring breakfast up here, I know it will be highly participated in. So we would love to, if you guys want to branch out and do a visit up here in the Panhandle, give us a holler.
We'll do. Thank you for the invitation.
Melta, go ahead and drop your information in the chat because it would be amazing to have you as one of our guest speakers here to talk about what you're doing as well. So I'd love to be able to connect with you after this and all the amazing things that you're doing and how we can partner up to grow the message that you are delivering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
You have another question in the chat here, Kelly, that says, do you have any data or opinion on the 16 personality type testing, and maybe if it ties to any sort of resiliency?
So I'm wondering if that, Lindsay, is that Myers-Briggs or is that MMPI? Do you know which one that is?
Myers-Briggs.
It is Myers-Briggs. So the little that I do know about that is I'm not sure how evidence-based that assessment is. I know I've taken it a bunch of different times and I know it's widely used, but I do not know a lot about the science behind it, but it certainly is something I'd be willing to look into to learn more. I don't know if anybody else on the call has any experience with that.
I guess not.
It's pretty widely used, a lot of organizations do it for team building, and it's just something I haven't had the opportunity to look into.
That is okay, Kelly. In your
Sounds
free
like you
time,
got homework.
yeah, man, in your free time, Kelly, maybe you want to try to look into that.
All
Oh my,
right, it's on my list.
yeah, good thing your husband's on this call.
Yeah, now he's gonna know why I'm too busy to talk to him, because I'm looking at the
Free time?
Myers-Briggs.
Oh goodness. Are there any other questions that we can address while we're still recording? Okay, if not, I'm going to stop the recording. But before I do that, you quoted Viktor Frankl in your presentation this evening, and Kelly, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that a very wise man in my life gave me a man search for meaning. I've given that gift forward to someone else on this call, and it changed the direction of my life. I highly recommend reading items from Viktor Frankl, but he has a quote that says, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality." And I feel like the love of family and the ability to grow and connect together is one of the most beautiful gifts that we can give to each other. So if there is a meaning in life at all, there must be meaning in the work and suffering that we give to this career and our families give with us. So, with that, love each other and make sure that every day with your family is full of meaning and love. Kelly, thank you so much to you and the Second Alarm Project. We're going to stop the recording now and continue our conversation. And thank you all to everyone who is here this evening. We'll see you next month, first Thursday of every month. Thanks so much.